Welcome everybody, our Community Advisory Committee members and our audience. Welcome to the meeting tonight. My name is Erin Key and I'm the facilitator. I work at Metro. I'm a senior communications specialist and my job is facilitating this group as well as community engagement for the Southwest Corridor project. And I would like to start with introductions. We have a couple of people at the table who are alternates serving for their for a regular CAC member, and one is Tim. Tim, you've been with us before, so welcome back.
Thank you.
Would you start with introducing yourself and the group you represent?
Sure. Tim Myshak, and I'm part of the Tigard City Center Advisory Committee. It's the urban renewal district in the city of Tigard.
Michael Kaiser. I live in Southwest Portland in Ash Creek neighborhood, but I get around a lot of the corridor area on bicycle, and so I'm here looking at bicycle and pedestrian issues.
Okay, Chad Hastings. I represent Center Cal Properties, manage Bridgeport Village Shopping Center, and a couple others in the area.
Evelyn Murphy, I'm a member at large for Tigard. I live in Tigard, work in downtown Portland. My husband, Tom Murphy, you and I should call him. You know my husband.
He serves on the same committee. All right. Hi, Roger.
Roger Beaverbeck, live in Southwest Portland. I'm representing Oregon Walks, the statewide pedestrian advocacy organization. Ibrahim Turkey, I represent the Muslim Education Trust.
I'm Rachel Dick with Community Partners for Affordable Housing, and I'm here actually with the mantle of affordable housing developers in the corridor area.
So I'm Debbie Hollenham with the Tigard Chamber. I'm here representing Tigard businesses as well as Linda Cott representing downtown Tigard and Tigard Downtown Line. So something by location and I'm interested in Southwest Corridor because it's supposed to come close to the library here.
Bill Gary Fowler, Barber Boulevard Business Representative. Our family owns property between 19th and 17th and Barber. We've been there since the 1980s.
Can I take, Kathleen, can I have a pause? First of all, for new people walking in the room, if you'd like to speak during public comment, it's going to happen in a couple minutes. Fill out a card back at the front sign-in table. And also, can I have a show of hands if you have an empty seat next to you in the audience? Can you put your hand up if you have an empty seat? All right, so that gives a couple people some ideas of where you might sit. Okay, now your turn, Kathleen.
Okay, I'm Kathleen McCullough. I'm the District Manager of Transportation and Parking for Portland Community College, and I'm here representing Portland Community College.
I'm Serge Killingsworth. I'm representing Tigard Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Boards.
I'm Arnold Panich. I live in Southwest Portland, but I represent the TriMet Committee on Accessible Transportation, and I'm a volunteer, and my mantra is that everybody rides.
My name is Jim Gardner. I live in the Blair Hill neighborhood, which is at the very northern edge of the corridor. And we're representing South Portland neighborhoods, which is that immediate area. And I report back actually to Southwest Neighborhoods Incorporated, Sweeney, which is the district coalition for the 17 neighborhoods in Southwest Portland.
And we have another alternate, so welcome.
Yes, my name is Clint Culpepper. I'm the bicycle program coordinator at Portland State University, sitting in for Ian Studi, our director.
Thank you for being here. Make sure you get a sandwich if you want one, or a cookie.
Yeah, pizza. I came a little earlier and ate some taste bud pizza, because I don't usually make it out here.
Good idea. That was a good idea.
My name is Lonnie Martinez. I'm a Tigard resident and a daily transit user. And I represent the Tigard Transportation Advisory Committee as well as the Tigard Transit Subcommittee.
Thank you.
I'm Tim Dickey. I'm a resident of Tigard. I live in the East Butte neighborhood, which is right above King City, kind of near the old Tigard house. And I'm representing families of Tigard and our community's future interests.
I'm Lucy Palau from Metro.
Welcome. Hey, Linda, do you mind introducing yourself as you walk in? I'm sorry to put the pressure on you.
Good evening, everyone. Linda Local, Fullerton Chamber of Commerce, where business never stops.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Just a couple of logistical things. We have a couple more bigger folders if you wanted to have a bigger folder. And if you needed one and we run out, then just let me know and I'll get more. And for everyone who is new to the coming to this committee, welcome. I'm glad you guys are here. We have a very full room, but hopefully we have space for everybody who wants to be here. The bathrooms are just outside the door, and our meeting goes till 8:45. So our agenda tonight, you guys, is going to be very similar to last month's meeting, where you're going to get talked at quite a bit. So make sure you get some food and cookie, and you can just sit there and eat while you listen. But I'm sure you'll have lots and lots of questions. At last month's meeting, a topic that came up a lot was your interest in understanding how TriMet works with property owners and business owners, and how that whole interaction goes for people. And so TriMet's prepared a presentation to come and talk about that, and in general kind of what happens. Your guys' charge is to develop a locally preferred alternative, right? And we've talked about that that's the mode and the route, primarily the route, and the terminus for our light rail project. That's your charge, but the project actually goes on much longer. On each of your packets, you had a timeline for the project. I know you've seen this before. It's on our website. I brought it again today just to be able to look at that and kind of reflect on it as we talk about what comes after this part of the project. We're just the first green box. But the project's going to go on for quite some time. So we'll focus on a conversation about that. I'm sure you'll have questions as part of that. We're also, one of our members, Rachel, is also serving in another capacity on another committee for Southwest Corridor focused on equitable housing. So she and I think a couple of others from that group are going to speak to us, so you can just get an update. I know a lot of people are interested in that topic, so that's why we wanted to do that. And then we are having Heather back, Heather who was here at the last meeting. She went over kind of the whole BIS to let you know kind of what it would look like and what the pieces are. Today she's going to dive a little bit deeper, but not extremely deep, into some specific topic areas so that you can begin to learn a little bit about what's going to be in the report. We recognize that when you get this report, you're going to have a lot to absorb, and then we're going to have to quickly go into discussions and forming your recommendation. It's going to be, there's a lot of hurry up and wait, and you're going to get all that at once. So the more that we can reveal information to you in advance, we want to try to do that. So that's the purpose of having her today, and I'm sure you'll have lots of questions. My job will be to keep us constantly moving so that we can try to get to all of those important topics. So that's our meeting tonight, but it is very much information out. So I want you to be ready. The other things that I wanted to say, we have a steering committee that's scheduled next Monday the 12th. And we have two liaisons, both on the side of the table. They've been great about speaking to steering committee about your meetings and letting them know the type of discussion that you've been having. Neither of them can make it to the meeting on Monday. It's at 9 a.m. in the morning, so it can be, I recognize that's difficult for some people. So it's 9 to 11 a.m. On Monday. The section for the CAC, I should have brought the agenda, is actually earlier in the agenda, so you would not necessarily have to be there the whole meeting if you couldn't, but we prefer that you were available for the whole meeting so that you can listen to what steering committee says and bring it back to us. So, I didn't make myself clear. Neither of them can go, so we need one of you. We would really like one of you to volunteer. Typically how this works is I write up some ideas of what I think you might want to say, some kind of summary of the meeting. So in this case, it will be both the January and the February meeting. And the two of them have agreed to work on that in advance, so over the course of this week, to decide what words those are. So you really don't have to make it all up yourself. The three of us are going to help you. So are there any volunteers that are available to go on Monday from 9 a.m. to 11? Is that Metro's office on Grand Avenue in Portland?
I will.
Thank you, Jim.
Violates one of my basic principles, never volunteer.
Never say yes?
I learned that a long time ago.
Sorry about that.
Jim, that ship sailed a while ago.
The fact that you're here at these meetings tells me differently. Thank you, Jim. Does anyone have any concerns about Jim representing you guys at that meeting? Okay, well, we'll help you out. It's going to be a little different in that the last two meetings, as I've said now twice, have been very information out. So there's not a lot of discussion to report to them. But I think it's nice that you guys are constantly, you're not all there, but you're building a relationship that the steering committee always recognizes that you're meeting and they get to see your faces and hear from you. And that's really important. All right, Jim, I'll email you. And we'll get ready for that.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
I saw that we have someone from Community Alliance of Tenants, but I also just wanted to mention the meeting that happened last week. There was a meeting out in Tigard. A couple of CAC members were there, and I just wonder if anyone wants to say anything about it.
Well, I was there. I didn't feel like the information.
Well, let's tell them what was the meeting, what was the type, what was it about? Or
I
what was it?
understand it was a meeting about landlord-tenant law and some pieces about housing as it related to this transit project. That's what I understood. There was a lot of landlord-tenant law information, discussion, and guidance. I stayed tuned the course of the way through the meeting. There wasn't a lot of transportation discussion, so I helped today.
Unfortunately, they did talk about detrimental effects that happened when light rail went through communities and who was pushed out, which demographics were pushed out. So you were able to see negative effects of light rail through urban renewal development, especially back in the day when they did the first one. So, yeah.
There were a lot of people. I think it was, help me, 30 to 40 people. Was it more than 40? And there was quite a diversity. There was at least 12, I think, people who were Spanish speakers who were getting the simultaneous translation in headphones, and we broke into small groups, and those groups operated in both English and Spanish, so that the meshing of the two languages, I think, was really nice. And there was a call to action at the meeting to organize, to invite more people to a next meeting, for everyone to bring a couple of friends, and make sure that everybody's voices are heard in the light rail process. So I thought that was really great to really encourage more and more people to get involved and to have their voices heard. So I thought that was nice. Anyway, so I think there's going to be more of them, and maybe we can maybe that can come up in community talk, Rachel. All right. Anything else about that? All right. Let's keep moving then. Last month I made a mistake. Facilitators, like rules of order, I didn't do the meeting summary from the November meeting. It just completely slipped my mind. So you had it in your meeting packet, and so then we just sent it out again. So this meeting packet, you got November's and January's, and so I would like to ask you now to in turn vote on the approval of both of those. I have a couple, so we'll start with November. I already received one edit from Michael over email, and that was for at 5.0 group reports. He asked that we add something to say that essentially that the results were informal, and that it wasn't, that the discussion in those small groups didn't represent a decision by this group. So he'd like to suggest that edit. I think that was the only one, right?
And so, yeah, well, there was a spelling error.
Oh, right, and found a spelling error under 4.0, right?
Page 4. I think it's 7.0 public comment.
So we had a spelling error. So those two edits are the two I have so far. Are there any other edits that anyone at the table would like to offer for November's meeting summary? Or changes to the two that were just offered? Nothing? All right, are you ready to approve the November meeting summary? All right, can I see a show of hands for approval of that? Nice and high. So I think everybody but Jim, Clint, and Tim are abstaining. Oh, Chad. Tim, I'm getting this so loose, right down. Tim, Chad, Jim, and Clint have abstained.
And me too. I
Oh,
wasn't there.
thank you. Okay, thank you. You can put your hands down. All right. And Linda abstained. Otherwise, approval for November. All right, let's move to January. So I also have two edits for January that Michael sent in. He found another spelling error. Thank you, Michael, for helping us with this. It is not the CAC man on page 2, 3.1. He said the CAC man consider options. It should be the CAC may consider options. So thank you, that's a typo. And then on page 2, 3.2, second paragraph, first sentence, after the semicolon, Michael has suggested a different way to state that sentence. It said, he suggested actually say something more like originally planned meetings were expected to go through March, but now are seen as perhaps going through July. Just a little bit better way of saying the same thing. So I have those two edits. Anyone want to suggest a change to those two edits or add any other edits to the January meeting summary? All right, no other edits? All right, then I'm gonna do this a different way that's gonna be easier on me. Could you raise your hand if you'd like to abstain from the vote on January? All right, so we have Tim, Chad, Evelyn, Raheem, and Clint. Tim, my Chad. Did you get all that?
Tim, Maisha.
Tim, Chad, Evelyn.
Chad, and
Raheem, Clint. Approve? Raise your hands if you approve. Any, what's the other word?
No.
No? Any other no votes? Okay, we're good, yay! All right, so we're all caught up on meeting summaries. Thank you, everybody. It is time for public comments. Oh, great, we have one. Jim Carlock, would you like to speak first?
I'm the only guy, I guess so.
You are.
So from here?
That's fine, sure.
So I just heard a comment about some possible downside to light rail affecting neighborhoods. And there's quite a bit of information about that subject on debunkingportland.com. I took pictures along the existing light rail lines a few years ago, and light rail essentially builds a fence through the neighborhood where the line is to keep people from, being on the tracks. And it divides the neighborhood into two halves. It's most obvious in Interstate Avenue. Also on Interstate Avenue, they took up 2 lanes of traffic, turning an uncongested road into one that has congestion most of the time now. Well, not most of the time, but certainly during rush hour. There's also a letter from the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office there on that website, debunkingportland.com, that talks about how the coming of light rail to, not the Milwaukee line, the other one going down south, has dramatically increased the crime at the Clackamas Town Center shopping center. And there's a few others that skipped my mind, but I thought I'd make you aware. Debunkingportland.com has a lot of downside information about light rail. And of course, the price tag of this line is just absolutely outrageous. And buses will serve more people easier because buses can drive into the neighborhood, pick up people, then get Barber Boulevard or the freeway into town. Light rail cannot go into the neighborhood, so you have to take a bus or walk long distances or ride a bike. Of course, bike riding is like 3 to 10 times more dangerous than driving a car. And I just don't see the point of spending huge amounts of money on light rail when buses will do better. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, we do have time if anyone else would like to just raise your hand and speak at this time. All right, seeing none, then I'm going to close public comments and invite Rachel. Rachel, do you want to speak from where you're at? What would you like to do? Do you have some guests?
I'm just saying hey to Asher over there, because Asher and I are doing this together, so.
Oh, hey, Asher, there you are. You're, Tim was like right in front of you and I couldn't see you behind him.
Can I step up here for a minute so I can see everything?
Yeah, you can sit in my seat and I'll shift over here.
Right here.
So I'm
Sure,
curious.
yeah.
I've had the privilege of participating on some of the equity and housing work that's been happening over the last 12 months. Some of it orchestrated behind me by Ryan from BPS, but a lot of my work has been with Community Alliance Tenants and Opal and Momentum Alliance, and I've learned a lot from working with those organizations. And so what I want to do is talk for a minute about some of the strategies that we think make sense as we think through the kind of displacement that could happen. And then Asher's going to talk a little bit about some of the outreach that's happening now that Aaron started talking about and some of what we've learned. What we've learned is somewhat distilled in some of these strategies, but also we've been hearing a lot from folks about kind of concerns and issues and fears that are coming up, and so we thought we would share those with you as well. So first, I actually have only one extra copy of the letter, so I don't know if anyone wants it. It's a really great letter. It can change your life.
I have another copy too, if anyone else.
Let me just summarize by saying there's several. This letter really is from a number of agencies that would be community partners for affordable housing, Realize Tenants, Unite Oregon, Opal Environmental Justice, Momentum Alliance, and the Coalition of Communities of Color. And this is to really the housing advisory group members for Southwest Corridor. That's kind of who the audience for this letter initially is, but it's really appropriate for us to be talking about it as well. And so in terms of where kind of some of the themes, the first thing that we think is really important to call out is that we really need to come up with some really good anti-displacement strategies that could include things like providing emergency rental assistance, legal aid, and education and outreach. And again, these are things that we've been hearing from people about, and so we wanted to share with you. When we talk about displacement, we're not just talking about the physical displacement of folks, which is an issue, as the light rail chooses kind of, as there's a LPA chosen, but also the market displacement of folks, the gentrification, things that are actually already starting to happen. Another strategy that we really want folks to be thinking about as we move forward is making sure that we have funding focused on this issue early and not waiting until we're much closer to the light rail going in and we're then, oh no, what are we going to do? We need some money to deal with housing. I mean, it's really now, and it really needs to be now, and we need to start having new funding coming early and often. So that's really important. And so there's a number of strategies, and certainly people may have also heard about the proposed metro regional housing bond that people are talking about. That could be one source of funding, but really cities and communities really we need to step up and find those resources. You turn your letter over, you'll see that publicly looking at one way to get ahead of the kind of market speculation is looking for publicly controlled land and making sure that we're setting that aside for affordable housing. That's something that is within our grasp to do. Making sure that we're using existing land use tools and regulations to the advantage of folks who need it. Sometimes zoning codes are used to keep people out. A lot of zoning codes are rooted in history of racism and not equitable housing, but this is an opportunity for us to think through how do we use land use regulations as a way to support folks, not push them out. Supporting ongoing engagement and long-term accountability. Accountability is important so that we're checking to see how are we doing, and that the feedback is enough to inform what we're doing at the moment, not waiting till it's over and too late to measure up how we're doing at helping people stay housed. And then part of that is making sure that we have somebody on the ground over time, and we're calling that a community preservation work group, to make sure that that accountability is happening. So those are just some of the things that we've been talking about and thinking about as a group. And I want Asher just to spend some time talking about what it's been like to do the community organizing, because it's really, really an important part of this.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks for letting me join you tonight. My name's Asher. Again, I'm from Community Alliance of Tenants, which is a renters' rights organization. And we've been really lucky to be able to partner with the City of Portland and also start to get to know the City of Tigard a little bit better and Metro in order to figure out how this light rail could impact tenants and what people's concerns are. And one of the first things that we did as we started to engage in this conversation with tenants is knock on doors and just start to have conversations. Oh, did you know this light rail has been proposed? What are your thoughts? Talk about people's housing. How long have you been in the neighborhood? What we learned is a lot of people who lived in some of the buildings that are they're market rate housing, right? But they're lower rent. A lot of the people who live very close to the light rail are immigrants and refugees. Specifically in Southwest Portland, we've been spending a lot of time with Somali families who have shared with us a story of displacement from a different neighborhood in Portland, from Northeast Portland, right around 9/11. So there's a lot of concern. A lot of the families we've been talking to are telling us that rents are already rising beyond what people are able to pay, and that the housing that people, and we've been door knocking in both Southwest Portland and in Tigard, a lot of the housing that people are able to afford is some of the last housing that is at that price point. So a lot of people tell us stories of coming in and out of those neighborhoods, of family members having to leave the city for places with more affordable housing, and also just people becoming houseless or being afraid of becoming houseless. So I was really grateful to see a few of you last week in Tigard, I think one of the, near the end of the meeting, that Lonnie and Elise and Aaron talked about earlier, there are some people who spoke up about just like what they were hearing and what they were feeling, and one of the comments that I thought really resonated with other people in the room was someone who said, you know, we need affordable housing now. I like the idea that like with this light rail, we're thinking about like, okay, what kind of affordable housing could come to mitigate, you know, the losses of our homes, but without the light rail, we're already short on housing, so let's have that conversation first, and then talk about transportation. And I think that just really spoke to a lot of people who are already feeling the crunch and feeling the housing crisis. And and I think I appreciate Rachel reading out those tools. I feel really grateful. It sounds like from talking to Rachel that this group is dedicated to figuring out how people can stay housed and stay in their communities with this new light rail commitment. And yeah, we wanted to make, if there's still time, just like a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we've got till 6:55, so we've got a good amount of time. I have a question though to start. Can you give us the context of who else sits on this committee with you, the Southwest Corridor Equity and Housing Advisory Group?
I can, but I think Ryan, who's sitting right behind me, can do a better job. So I'm just gonna deflect.
Absolutely. There's a project handout too that's out there that in the inside of it should list all the advisory group members.
Oh, perfect.
So maybe half of them are listed on that on that letter, and then the other half be composed of local government, real estate, finance, and lenders. So Rachel's one of the few that does community work and development, and others are more kind of emphasize community engagement and outreach, or real estate and finance. So it's a balanced group that's supposed to kind of help us be aspirational in our work, but also be grounded in practical solutions that are achievable. That is and so far so good. We're like 5 meetings in. We have a draft strategy coming out in March, and then final strategy in June or July. Supposed to correspond with the local preferred alternative. So we're really just kind of responding to your work in a sense, and community.
So we already have 2 questions, but before we get to them, I'm gonna use my, I get to call myself first.
I can call on you, Aaron.
If there's folks at this table, or if there's folks in this room that are really interested in the work that you guys are doing, what advice do you have for how they can get involved in this? And I guess that goes to any of you.
Well, I mean, I think we could certainly let people know about the next community meeting that's happening. I can't remember the date. I think I'm going to the 23rd.
April 3rd in
And
Tigard.
back at St. Anthony's?
Yeah.
Perfect.
And certainly, Brian, sends out minutes from our meetings. You probably would be happy to add people to your mailing list, right?
Yeah, I'd be surprised if you're not already on our mailing list. We put out like kind of quarterly updates, but it's been pretty rare. But our project webpage is extremely stocked with data and reports and progress.
And it's my job to be representing a lot of this here, so I would just say if you have any questions or if you want to ask me, I could hook you up with, I mean, I may not know the answer, but I could find the answer or hook you up with a person who can get you the information. So I'm your affordable housing contact there too.
What time is the
What time is the meeting?
I don't know, but can we get the info to you, Erin?
Yeah, I'm happy to send it out. And you can always, the last meeting was on our Facebook page, so if you follow us on social media, that's another way to find out. I believe that one started at 6:30, so it's probably in the evening.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I schedule it so it does 6:30.
Oh, 6:30, okay, there you go.
Thank you.
All right, let's go Tim, Roger, Linda.
Can I add to your question?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yes, of course.
Cool. So we're starting a leadership cohort of families who live along the corridor this Wednesday. And that cohort is going to learn together about a lot of the issues, same issues that I think you all talk about, and specifically the intersections of transportation and housing, with the goal that at the end of the cohort, the leaders are going to plan an event together and invite in community to have a broader conversation. So I hope you all will join us for that, and that'll likely be in May, but we'll make sure to get details to this group.
Yeah, and if you feed me dates and remind me to send it to everybody, I'll be a conduit for that.
Thank you.
Tim?
Among the groups that I've heard mentioned over the year or so that we've been talking here, I don't hear the elderly spoken about a lot as a constituent or stakeholder group in this. And I would just like to put a plug in for them. It's kind of a softball question, but I know in the case of my family, my mother-in-law is kind of caught in this gray area where she doesn't qualify for certain social safety net funding. Yeah, she's living definitely on a fixed income, and the apartments that she would want to live in are almost priced in a predatory way because demand is so high, right? And so they're really squeezed out. I'm sure that she would like to participate more in groups, advocacy groups like yours, especially if there's a free lunch involved. That seems to get her out. But I think that she has probably connected with that information because her main points of contact are through the social services and social safety net resources. And so they get on her radar.
What kind of, are there groups or things that she's connected with in Tigard that would help these folks? And
she goes down to the King City Community Center, which has a lot of support for retired folks and community groups and luncheons.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Roger, you're next.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate this presentation here tonight. I hope that we can receive a copy of this letter electronically if we haven't already.
Yeah.
And,
You sent it to me. Yeah, I can send it out.
And also thanks to the PSU, for staff for sharing the PSU reports. I reviewed the 4-page summary, but not the 45-page or whatever it was. Yeah, but thank you. And in your conversations with the residents along the corridor, did you also have a sense of how many of them take transit and or where they travel for work and that sort of thing? Not to collect data necessarily, but just to understand that important part of it.
Yeah, a lot of the people that we're talking to, at least we have been spending a whole lot of time kind of close to Capitol Hill Library. And a lot of people in that neighborhood actually do drive when they're able to. Some bus riders too. And then I think people, honestly, we are working with a whole lot of women in the neighborhood, and it seems to be that, and that's like really common for us, right? Like women are awesome community organizers and always have been. And in some of the families, women are home and taking care of children, and I'm not as sure where men are working. I know like some of the men we've talked to are taxi drivers. That's like a job I've heard a couple times. So people are kind of going around the city for work.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Linda.
I would be curious about statistics relating to build out of the area. We know that we have a housing shortage, which is driving up prices, supply and demand. So when you build a corridor, are you seeing greater density happening? Buildings will house a lot more people so that as it gets built out, eventually those prices will start to fall.
I'm not sure, my experience is that I'm not sure that just because you add a lot of units, prices, the market actually changes. I think in terms of going down, I think what has happened historically is that prices have gone up along the corridor. So that we have to be very intentional about making sure that when we build, we set aside some of the housing to be for folks who are not making who are not maybe able to pay market rent. And that's one of the dynamics, because it is definitely, there are some times when, supply and demand, goes like this, and sometimes having that extra supply could decrease demand, but I think our experience on the corridor is that the different ones, different light rail corridors, that hasn't really happened. So that's the point of really thinking through, how do we make sure we don't lose, not just don't lose ground, but help make sure that everybody has an equitable opportunity to live along this kind of public investment.
And then the next question I have with that would be, who pays for it?
Who pays for
Because-
housing?
Yeah, it's you and I and taxpayers that pay for it. It's a if it's to be a public subsidized, whether it's incentives for builders or incentives for renters or whatever it is, who pays for it? What does that look like? And the polling that I've seen in the past is everybody wants affordable housing, but nobody wants to see their taxes go up. So there's gotta be, I mean, it's such a complex issue, and I'm not critical.
No.
Is
Is that a rhetorical question, or do you want me to ask
it
to
really
answer
is
it?
more rhetorical, because we actually are
should
starting.
answer it.
No, we have a committee started right now in SWLRT, trying to just, because we are so under, 90% of our workforce drives it every single day. We are so under units of housing in our community, and like, nobody wants to pay for it, and that's a big issue.
I will add, I'm happy to talk to you or anyone about how we put together the funding for building housing, but I also just want to throw out there that we all pay for not having housing. Not having housing in our community is also very expensive. It's expensive because of the impacts on roads and congestion. It's expensive because people who don't have anywhere to live, besides all the social costs to them personally, they end up in the emergency room more frequently. They end up in the jail system more frequently. There's lots and lots of costs connected to for elders. They can send people into assisted living when they don't need to be in a nursing home or assisted living, because they could live independently on their own. So there are a lot of costs that are connected also to not housing people. And so I think it's important when we talk about what the cost is to also think about what the cost is of not taking care of that.
Can I make a plug for a piece of TriMet research that just came out about ridership decline in areas where lack of affordability exists? I highly recommend that body of research. Came out in quarter 4 of last year, and it just shows that ridership is very dependent upon those who are dependent upon transit, right? And a lot of those same folks are low income and need affordable housing, and that connection between affordable housing infrastructure and transit infrastructure is shows up in ridership numbers and fare box revenues. Something to consider.
So we have 2 more, Evelyn and Chad, and we need to do it in about 3 or 4 minutes.
Easy.
Okay,
So
great.
you have 3 minutes.
This is a big topic and obviously can't be addressed right now, but one of the very compelling parts of this summary is the need to move now on getting land, the land that can be managed and planned with. And the land is the one thing, when it's gone, usually it's gone. I'm hoping, and maybe at some point we can get some more information about what is being done now about securing land.
I mean, I think this is a moment for us to have that conversation and to be very assertive on this, so that we can make sure that we have some land banking that's happening.
So if I can just make a comment rather than having a question. CenterCal Properties recently developed a small project in Park City, Utah. You know Park City, it's a pretty posh area, very expensive. However, the policy was written in a very appealing way that required us, when we built our new Whole Foods and some additional retail, that we also include some Section 8 housing, which we did, and has turned out to be a beautiful partnership with the city. And so when we're talking about these things, it's important that we remember that it can be included in policy, and probably should.
Thank you, Chad. That was a nice way to wrap up the conversation, and you did it quickly, so you're ending right on time, so I appreciate it. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you so much. Thank you, Asher. Okay, so we're going to transition. If you remember last month, can I ask a logistic question? How's the temperature in this room?
You can see the wind blowing the curtains.
Yeah, I feel cold, so you guys must be colder because you're sitting under things. Okay, I'll see what I can do about that while Jennifer comes up. Last month, you have asked for more information about how TriMet works with property owners, what the community engagement and opportunities to be involved after this DEIS process will be, and so those are the kind of things that we invited Jennifer to come. You don't have, I'll move, and you can use this remote so you can stand or sit somewhere that's not in the spotlight. Great. And let me know when you want to do the video. We'll turn off the light. Okay. I'll just do that. Actually, why is it so big? It got bigger. Oh, shoot. Yeah. This is really weird. Maybe we should light up. We're trying just that one, yeah. Or the other one? How's that? Pretty dark. It's pretty dark. Is that okay? All right. For some reason when we close screen this, and this is the clicker. But I'm gonna go back to. We'll see how that works. Well, it's pretty awkward to get over there. Somebody gets to crawl. I can crawl it. Oh, Chad's got the arms.
Chad, you beast.
Nice. Okay, that'll work. Thank you. Thanks, you work.
Okay, so I'm Jennifer Cruiser. I work with TriMet's Capital Projects and Construction Division, and I'm a Community Affairs Manager. I've been at TriMet for about 15 years, so I've been involved with the Yellow Line, Green Line, and Orange Line projects. So I'm going to talk with you today about how we work with communities during the design and construction phase of transit projects. I'm also going to talk about how our real property department works in terms of purchasing property and relocating businesses and residents.
I didn't bring a copy for all of you CAC members, so please don't take one unless you've asked for one. You might get it back, we'll see. Okay, sorry, Jennifer. So, does that look like?
It's beautiful.
It just looks black and white.
It looks black and white.
Sorry.
Okay. Okay, well, anyway, so,
But everybody has a color copy of this.
Okay,
because I
great.
brought some.
So Aaron reminded us earlier of the project schedule. So your charge is in this planning process to get the project to a locally preferred alternative. So that's selecting the route where this light rail project will go. TriMet then manages the detailed design and of course the construction and operation of the transit infrastructure. So what I'm going to be talking about today is the very specific FTA-funded light rail project that TriMet would be designing and constructing. So the role of TriMet during this phase is to make sure that we are hearing from the communities where this transit infrastructure is being designed, and also that the communities understand the opportunities and constraints of the projects. So you'll probably see the same kinds of activities in terms of community engagement that you've been seeing during this planning process, but it will be at a much finer level of detail. We're also very open to suggestions about ways that we can reach communities that have not been as engaged. A lot of our work, though, will focus on working with property owners, businesses, and residents who are immediately adjacent to the route that is chosen in the LPA. The image here on the right, which is maybe a little bit hard to see from back there, shows this is a lot of different sizes of semi-trucks and delivery trucks, and this is some engineering drawings for an intersection. So this is just an example of the kind of thing that we do during that detailed design phase. We would meet with all of the businesses along a particular street to understand how big of trucks come to them, how often they come, what routes do they come on. And all that information is fed then to the design team so they can figure out how to design the intersections, the traffic signals, the driveways, to continue to accommodate access for those businesses. Another important piece during the design phase is that we actually will bring on a construction contractor toward the tail end of the design phase. We typically on light rail projects have used a form of contracting called CMGC, Construction Manager General Contractor. And that's different from the typical low bid contract. We actually have to get a special exemption to use this form of contracting, but it ends up being much more efficient because we have the contractor help advise us on constructability and sequencing, and they're actually engaged with the design team, and they're engaged with us as we're working with the community to understand their needs and interests and concerns. So they have a lot of information going into construction about how they're gonna build something with minimal impacts for the businesses and residents that are nearby. Then as we are in the construction phase, sorry that these pictures aren't showing up very well. This is a photograph of a construction zone on the Portland Mall project. So this was when we added light rail to 5th and 6th Avenues downtown. And out of the picture here, I'm not really sure what happened. We've got a walkway that is, there's a very clear pedestrian walkway that is keeping this work zone safe. And then we've got a sign here that identifies the project and then identifies businesses that are on that block to make sure that they have visibility and access.
It's your laptop, it's projecting on the back of your laptop.
Is that shadow? Thank you. It's also very dark. Anyway, so during the construction phase, we continue those one-on-one relationships with the businesses and residents that are adjacent to the work zones. So by the time we get to construction, we know what kind of delivery they have, what kind of noise and vibration concerns they have, so that we can all kind of work together to keep everybody working, to keep their business going and to keep the contractor working to get the project done as quickly as possible. So things like on the orange line, there was a dental lab adjacent to where we had to do some major demolition of a roadway. So we were in touch with them, and when we were going to have to be doing the big breaking up pavement, they would pause on their building crowns that are on these really sensitive machines, and then the guys would go in and tell them we're ready to go again, and by them staying in touch with each other, we were able to keep everybody going and not have an interruption in their work and be able to keep the construction team going too. Another piece that has been really helpful with having the CMGC form of contracting is it's a negotiated price, and we can build incentives into their contract for the way that they work with the community, for the way that they keep a tight construction site. And then also, we'll save for another day talking about our DBE program. We often have incentives for our contractors to utilize disadvantaged businesses and have apprenticeship programs, and to really try to build the workforce for women and minorities. So other things that we do during the construction phase, we know that for businesses, visibility and access is really, really important. So we provide signage and maps and materials for their websites to make sure that their customers and vendors know how to get to them. We've done marketing and branding. We've also tried to really emphasize within our teams about buying local and supporting the businesses that are in the corridor. And we've had a lot of success with referrals to other programs that partners have available for technical assistance, and in some cases there's even been partner loans and grants that have been available. On our last couple of projects, we've used the PSU Business Outreach Program to provide technical assistance to businesses, in some cases that were being relocated and some that were enduring construction, and that's been a huge help to those businesses. I'm going to pause there for any questions. Okay. Quick story about the construction phase. On 17th Avenue, which was part of the Orange Line, this is an industrial area that is accessed from Powell Boulevard, which is US Highway 26. So there's a lot of big trucks coming to this industrial area from the highway. We actually had to close that access for about a year, the connection between Powell and 17th Avenue. So for some of these businesses, we made customized maps so that their truck drivers would know how to get to them. We put out customized signs so that people could find their way through the neighborhood to get to them. This is also adjacent to a residential area. It's like the very edge between a residential and industrial area. So we wanted to make sure that people weren't cutting through residential streets, but were able to access these businesses. So we did a lot of work to make sure that they had the materials to communicate about detour during this phase of construction. And then it turned out there was actually one day, and then we also had the contractor in touch with this business about when some of their delivery trucks were coming. And then there was one day when their delivery trucks actually couldn't make it all the way to this one particular business. And this is a business that makes really high-end pet food. So it's basically raw meat, and then they brand it and do stuff to it to make it into the pet food that goes to Whole Foods and New Seasons. And so you don't really want that just sitting in a truck for very long. So one day their delivery truck wasn't able to make it, and so our contractor stopped what they were doing and used their truck to unload this semi and take it to the refrigerators. So that's the kind of partnerships that we have with the community and with our contractor during the construction phase. So after construction is complete, there's still several more months of testing and training before the new service is actually open. So that's when we shift our public engagement focus to safety and how people will use the new service. So we've had a lot of success working with schools to take kids on preview rides, so they get to actually ride the system before it's open to the public, and talk with our transit police and really get all of this messaging about how to be safe around trains. This will also be the time when we're talking about bus service planning, and the DEIS will be making assumptions about what kind of changes to the bus network would complement the new light rail line. But as we get closer to actually opening it, that's when we will have this larger public process to look at what really makes sense for the community at that point in time when we are ready for the light rail service to begin. And then there'll also be marketing to attract new riders. Questions there before I switch gears to acquisitions and relocations? Yeah.
My question goes a little bit back to what you were talking previously. How much decision-making does the business owner have when he or she determines that the encroachment that the development of light rail has on their property renders it inoperable and relocation is necessary? Do you have examples of those? Do you have testimonials? Do you have examples of where businesses, because of the encroachment of the development, does require relocation? Some of the businesses up and down the Barber corridor would love to see examples of successful relocations. And
that's what's up next.
Excellent.
Okay. Okay, so switching gears to talking about purchasing property and relocating residents and businesses. Just going back to our schedule that we looked at earlier, and I want to point out a couple of notes that we added here. So in the environmental review process, we are in the middle of the draft environmental impact statement. At the conclusion of the final environmental impact statement, the FTA will issue a record of decision, which concludes that process and says that the mitigations are appropriate and that the mitigations are appropriate and that everything that needed to be avoided or minimized or mitigated has been appropriately done so. That concludes, or that the issuance of the record of decision is what authorizes TriMet to begin making property purchases. So we don't, right now that's looking like late 19, of course, you see how I highlighted schedule is subject to change because those dates we don't have that exact date in a crystal ball at this moment. But that's what authorizes TriMet to begin that process. Meanwhile, the purple bar, the advanced design and engineering, will help inform the project team about how we can minimize impacts. So what's identified as a major impact at one phase, the continued work will try to minimize that to the greatest extent possible. That advanced design and engineering will also give us information about which properties or which businesses might be more difficult to relocate, which would need a longer timeline to relocate. Or which pieces of construction might be more complex, where we might need to be getting in there earlier because the particular type of construction there is going to take longer. So that process will give us more information about what properties we might want to start acquiring earlier or later. And then finally, funding is also a really important piece of this too. So there'll be some questions about at what point do you start making those purchases, at what level of funding certainty are partners ready to start taking on some of that risk. There's a lot of benefit for the earlier purchases can be made. That will help speed up construction, but we also don't want to take on too much risk without funding certainty. So we don't know what date we would start purchasing property. There are several different factors. I also will say that a typical process is around 18 months, They can vary widely, but most property owners could expect it to be around 18 months. And all this process is governed by what we shorthand call the Uniform Relocation Act. And this is the set of federal regulations that guide how the expenditure of dollars in a federally funded project are used to purchase property and relocate people. And it's really this balance between protecting those who are being displaced and the expenditure of public dollars for a greater good.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
The city governments are not prohibited from already going in and negotiating with property owners a right of purchase if they want to be the first to have the right to purchase their land, knowing that the people are going to be moved.
Yeah, the thing about the record of decision, that's about if a property purchase is to be eligible for federal funding. So if a local government does a negotiation with a willing seller, that's separate.
But that would still enable them to do land banking if they chose to.
Question, if there isn't another location that's better than the current one, how do you deal with them? There's no choice that would actually be better for a business. Once in a while you have Fifth and Main. How do you deal with a situation like that?
Find the best possible.
You just buy them out and tell them to close?
Well,
or-
let's keep going, and we'll talk a little bit more detail that might help sort of answer some of that.
So if a business needs to be relocated, who looks for the new property?
That's what we're getting to.
Okay.
You guys are just ready. Love it. Let's let her
Waiting months for this conversation.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I'm thinking, let's let her finish this whole section, because then we can address questions, because then we can avoid asking questions she's gonna get to. So let's just get through this section and stop
Okay.
questions after that.
Okay, so I want to make this distinction, that we do not purchase businesses. We purchase real estate and provide benefits to businesses and residents for their relocation. So the real estate purchase is the land that's needed for the project and any buildings or improvements on it, and then any damages to the remainder. And we're gonna get to that in a minute. And that's all governed by this concept of just compensation that we're gonna get to. And then the relocation is a set of its dollars and benefits that are to help move a business or a home. So there's three types of property acquisitions. There's a full acquisition where we purchase the entire parcel. We're talking about tax lots. We purchase the entire parcel. There's a partial acquisition where what's shown in green is considered the property that is the remainder that the property owner keeps, and the blue is what the project would purchase. So sometimes we call it a sliver, so it's just taking a chunk out of a property. That's a partial acquisition. And then a temporary construction easement is where there's a temporary use of some or all of a parcel for construction. So those are three types of property acquisition that you'll see in the draft environmental impact statement. I'm going to talk now about just compensation. So that's how much does a property owner get? So this is part of the regulations that talks about the land that's needed for the project. So that would be the blue area. The improvements that are on it, signs, buildings, and then any economic damages to the remainder. So that green piece that they keep, if it is somehow damaged by the fact that it's not as big as it used to be. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more too. So if the economic damages to the remainder are so great, TriMet can offer to purchase the whole thing. But the property owner doesn't have to sell the whole thing if they don't want to. So to explain that a little bit more, I brought a printer. So if this, say like this white area is Barber Boulevard, and this blue area has to be purchased, the project has to purchase that area for adding light rail and sidewalks and bike lanes on Barber. And then this green, the property owner can keep that. Their building is on the remainder, so it's fine. But this purple, that looks black on our screen, is where their parking lot was. So their parking lot gets kind of messed up by the fact that it's chopped in half. The damage to this remainder is valued also in the appraisal. So the appraiser will identify a value for that loss of parking. All right, so it's not a fast process. We'll be working with property owners long before they get their official notice, but that initiates a formal process. There'll be an appraisal, just like if you were having any other kind of real estate transaction, but it'll be a very specialized appraiser. And once their work is complete, the appraisal will be peer reviewed. And then that also is reviewed by the Federal Transit Administration. So the amount that comes out of that process is considered the offer of just compensation. So there's an offer to the property owner, and they can accept that offer and go through a closing, or that can start a negotiation. We're typically able to reach a mutually agreeable purchase price through that process. If not, the next step would be for it to go to, for TriMet to deposit the amount of the offer with the court, in which case the property owner has immediate access to those funds and negotiations can continue. If no agreement is ever reached, it would go to court. That rarely happens. On the Orange Line, we have one property go to court. So it is a sort of a typical real estate transaction, and the property owner can have access to the money at any time they want while negotiations continue.
And approximately how many total properties for Orange Line?
We're gonna get to that too.
Don't interrupt her with your questions, you guys. I told you to hold your questions.
Okay, so that was acquisitions. It's 218. That was acquisitions, so that's transactions with property owners. Now we're gonna talk about relocations. So this is businesses and residents. Again, we'll be working with them long before they receive their official notice, but that kicks off the formal process. And they will be working with a relocation specialist. And so this is somebody that knows the market really well. We'll work with them to start to understand what their particular needs are as a business or a family, and help them identify replacement properties. So they're there to be their advocate, and work with them to find a spot. The other benefit that residents and businesses get is all of their moving costs being covered. So that can be a commercial move, having movers come and do everything, or it can be a self-move. You can do it yourself and be reimbursed for your time based on what it would have cost for a commercial mover. A little bit more complicated than that, but it's there's a cash or a service benefit. And then there are different benefits from there. There are different benefits between businesses and residents. So for residents, the relocation agent will help them find a replacement housing. But it has to meet certain standards that are all laid out in these regulations about being decent, safe, and sanitary. So that means it's gotta be, have a fire escape and have a kitchen and have heat and hot and cold water. But it also talks about how big, what's an appropriate size space for what certain sizes of families. So it actually talks about siblings of different genders after a certain age can't share rooms. It's a little bit prescriptive. So in many cases, it will say that a family needs a bigger place than they're in right now. And if that's the case, then it's likely that it might cost more. And so the regulations also provide for a rent supplement.
For how long?
For up to 42 months. So the rent supplement could go up to 42 months, and in some cases, that could actually be equivalent to the cost of a down payment. So there have been situations where we've been able to move people from a rental situation into a home ownership situation. So for businesses, again, the relocation agent helps them identify locations, and will also be able to provide them access to specialists like an architect or space planner, any number of professional services to help figure out how they could reconfigure their business at the new site. They're eligible for reimbursement of their site search costs. And then they also can access replacement personal property. So that is new equipment if old equipment can't be moved or it wouldn't meet current code or it's obsolete. So we've had a number of situations where people have been able to upgrade their equipment as they're in this moving process. Then there's also reestablishment expenses. That could be like wiring your new place for your new internet, so all the things that you need to do to get set up in your new location. Then another option for a business is this payment in lieu of relocation benefits if they decide not to relocate. It's basically kind of a cash out deal. And that can be helpful if someone has, say, an income property and they have a business set up for that. They would have the real estate transaction, but then they'd also have this payment for their business having changed. So just to give a sense of scale, it was 218 properties that we affected on the orange line, but that includes those three categories: full acquisition, partial acquisition, and temporary construction easement. We relocated 18 residences and 63 businesses. 4 businesses chose that payment in lieu of relocation. And just one of those properties did go to court over their transaction. So I'm going to tell a few more stories and then we'll listen for your questions. So there were a few businesses on the orange line that had 24/7 operations that couldn't be interrupted. We had a couple of manufacturing facilities that had equipment that you couldn't turn off. It would blow up the equipment if it turned off, or it wouldn't be able to be restarted. So we were able to get them set up at their new location before turning off their old stuff. We had that with a couple of industrial manufacturers and also with the radio station. Had to have them completely set up at their new location before turning off their old one. This is an example of, and with this, yeah, it's really hard to see here. We had a business or a property owner on 17th Avenue that 17th Avenue, similar to Barber, widened quite a bit to add the light rail and the bike and
I'm gonna
new
do the
standard
light
sidewalks.
again just to see if it doesn't help a lot. It really doesn't. I'm gonna file a complaint about that.
But so with widening the street, it went about probably 40 feet into this building. So the standard practice would be to offer to purchase the building, and the project would demolish the building, and that owner would be left with a very nice developable site. But he actually really wanted to keep this building. So the team was able to work with him to basically chop off the building so that he could keep the tenants that he had in that side, and he actually had one of his own businesses in that side too. And then we just had to relocate the businesses that were on the front side. So one of those businesses used that opportunity to take their business to the next level and go from being in a warehouse to a storefront, and now they're on Division Street in a hipster area and they're doing great, and you will hear from him in a minute. Another example of a business that went from a warehouse to a storefront is this business EcoSpeed, that was a designer and manufacturer of electric assist motors for bicycles. They were in this warehouse, and we actually relocated them to another warehouse, but through that process, and that's where they wanted to go, but through that process, we hooked them up with PSU's business outreach program, and they got business consulting from PSU that helped them weather some major transitions in their industry. So the electric assist bicycle industry has gone to a lot of overseas manufacturing. So they have been able to change their business model to be design and engineering consulting for e-bike equipment. And now they also have a retail storefront and a service. They do repairs to e-bikes. And actually one of the original owner is still doing the design consulting, and one of his employees has now done this spin-off business, and now they have a storefront on Sandy that's co-located for these two businesses, and they are doing great. And then this last example is a business that really was able to upgrade their equipment. This is a rag muffler, and it's a muffler shop that was on the corner of McLaughlin Boulevard and 17th Avenue in a pretty rundown looking old gas station. So they moved into a much upgraded building and got a lot of new equipment, because to move their old equipment, it was too old and not up to code to move to this new location. So now they have equipment that meets all the current seismic codes, And they were a little concerned about their changing location, but it turns out they moved to be adjacent to another car auto-oriented business. And they stayed close enough to their old location that they were able to keep a lot of their corporate accounts and even expand the accounts that they have. So they are in a better position and actually just added another employee. And now, we will hear from one of those businesses, I think.
We make cycling messenger bags and backpacks and like related accessories, all hand sewn. The process actually started off when TriMet came in and said, what would you like as, to come out of this? And, we were in the back of a warehouse at the time. We said, we would like a storefront, which was a big step up. And then they helped us through the process of making that happen. And, we had advisors that walked us through the entire thing, and it made it all really easy and straightforward. It would have been definitely a lot larger of a challenge for us to have gotten a storefront. It would have been a much longer of a process, and there wouldn't have been such an incentive to make it happen by forcing us to try and do something new. So in that sense, it definitely pushed us to move forward, and it gave us some capital to make it happen.
You asked for stories.
That was black pack.
Black packs. Hey, how's the temperature now? It's getting hot?
It's warm.
Is that, do you have any more slides?
No,
Okay.
no slides.
Great, then we've got about 12 minutes for questions. Let's go that way. So we'll start with Michael and go around this way.
So it sounds like it's up to the business to find a new site that's appropriate for them. Is that,
Nobody's gonna make them move somewhere they don't wanna move. They will have a relocation assistant who will help identify sites for them, and they can choose whatever site they want. But they don't have to do it on their own.
okay, thank you.
Evelyn.
I know that the slides and things weren't quite as visible as you wanted. Is this online or something?
Not yet, we can put it online.
I emailed it to you today.
Oh,
Yeah. It was only this morning.
Oh, that's right.
Roger.
Thank you. Yeah, good presentation. In between, this is not quite germane to your presentation tonight, but in between choosing the LPA and the recommended alternative and launching into the more detailed design things, there seems to be a continued need for other types of public involvement, including, like I referred to at the previous meeting, selection of the station locations, and there's still much work yet to be done. Is that something you might talk about at a future meeting here, or can you address any of that tonight?
Yeah, well, as we, once we know what our route is, we will be starting processes to verify station locations, get into some of those design details with specific geographic communities. We'll be convening some sort of committee like this, and we will absolutely be having a public process around station locations.
Kind of the period that you just talked to, Roger, is about when Metro hands over the reins for the project to TriMet. So in that's where TriMet convenes a group like this, and TriMet starts running meetings, similar to what you've seen in the past, but focused a little bit differently.
The product that you'd be looking for, Roger, is called a conceptual design report. And so you can go to the Orange Lines library and look up that, and that will give you a feel for the types of things that are done in terms of evaluating station areas.
Teresa works for PBOT, Portland Department of Transportation, Bureau of Transportation.
Conceptual design.
Report.
Thank you.
Raheem.
So in the case of partial acquisitions, let's say for a business or an apartment, for example, but there will be a loss of parking. Obviously, it would work first with them and see if there's a design that will provide the same number of parking. But what if there is a loss below what the code would allow, or the land use would allow? Is that automatically goes to full acquisition?
Yeah, it
Or-
could, if the damages make the property not usable, it would be
But it could still be
ongoing.
usable, but that number does not meet
Yeah.
the local
Yeah.
agency code.
I think a more common situation of a partial acquisition that seems like very small but ends up requiring the entire parcel to be purchased is when access is blocked off and they don't have the ability to get on or off the site from public right of way.
But my question is that, I mean, if it's usable, now go back to the parking, you lose a couple of spots, but that will put it below what the code requires. Would you work with the local agency to give them an exemption, maybe?
Yep.
Exception?
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, so Eric works for Portland Planning.
I can't speak for Tiger, but for the city of Portland, the zoning code has exemptions for the going out of compliance with the standards because of things like this. So generally, you just become non-conforming, but you're allowed to continue.
Does that help? Okay, Linda?
Throughout the presentation, you used the word as owners, property owners, but many of the businesses are on leased property that has been built for them. And so how does that process change for somebody that has a lease of the property and they built the facility to their specifications, but they don't own the property?
They would be entitled to the relocation benefits as a tenant.
So I think what you're talking about is a business owner. They would be considered a
The
business owner.
business owner, they've invested the money to have the build out.
And they need all those new things in the place that.
But so you've really got two different parties you're dealing with. You've got the property owner and you've got the business owner and you.
Yeah, so in some cases, those are two totally separate,
Entities.
I guess transactions is the right word. Yeah.
But you still take into account the tenant improvements the person the business made.
So their personal property would be relocated or replaced.
But what about they paid for the building?
Like TI, the TI.
I guess I'm not sure how to answer that.
We've stumped her. So what's one we can follow up on?
Yeah.
So yeah, tenant improvements. So if you've made improvements to the building, but you don't own that building.
You don't own the land. You own the
Or you don't own the land or the building, right?
You could own the
Well,
building.
you own the building, but not, or you paid for the building.
Right,
You don't own
But
it.
you don't own it, perhaps.
Right. Okay, so we'll bring that back, ask about tenant improvements. Debbie?
So I liked seeing that there were businesses that benefited and thrived from being relocated. Do you have any examples of businesses that did not do well with relocation or ended up closing because of relocation?
We had a couple of convenience stores that were thinking about retirement, were not sure, and then the idea of relocating and starting somewhere new was, they decided not to, so they decided to take that payment in lieu. They were kind of doing so-so, I'm not sure. I don't.
So how long after, like, post build out, do you guys kind of track what goes on with properties that were relocated? Like a year, 2 years?
It depends on it depends on the business and how long their file stays open, how many more reimbursements they need for things that are associated with their thing, because that can go on for quite a while. But I guess we haven't made a practice of checking in back with them regularly after they're done with their relocation benefits.
And I know, Jennifer, you've told me once before that the process can be 18 months typically, is that what you said? So,
But it can be way longer or way shorter.
Average of 18.
Yeah,
Yeah, so even if that process goes well, it's a really long process that someone didn't ask to be part of, so they might
They kinda wanna be done.
They kind of want to be done talking to TriMet at that point. So it doesn't sound like there's a formal process that requires them to stay in touch with you, unless they're still having a business transaction of some kind, or payments or something. Arnie, looks like you're next.
I have my orange hat on. For 5 years, and Jennifer was there the whole time, I was on the committee to build the orange line. 218 property owners, and I never heard one peep of a property owner coming to our CAC and asking us for relief. Not once. So a couple of businesses that I think about that were taken. I want to know if you could just give us an example of what happened to these guys. For example, the Semaphore restaurant on the corner of Holgate and 17th, and a big convenience store in that corner also.
Those were the ones that chose to not
Okay,
relocate.
and then the other example I would ask you about is McLaughlin and Park, where they took another restaurant, and across the street where the parking lot is now, there was some kind of auto service
You're
building.
thinking of Da Vinci's Italian restaurant?
What?
Da Vinci's Italian restaurant? Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, the Italian restaurant.
They moved out of state.
They moved out of
I'm
state.
in touch with them. Yeah.
Okay, and what about the Semaphore?
They chose not to relocate. They retired.
They retired. Okay, so they're not complaining. What's happening is it's like a gift out of heaven. These guys are paying me top dollar, whether I'm a tenant or an owner, and I'm getting the hell out of it and going to the bank. That's about what happens.
Arnie, can you give us an idea? You said you worked for 5 years on the committee. In comparison to what this group, what part of that time what was going on with the project during that time that you were working on the project? Was it before construction started, or all during construction, or both?
Both.
Both?
Yeah.
And it was the same committee through that whole process?
5 years.
Okay, and that was your perspective on how it went for the people who worked?
Right, and I had to schlep to St. Philip Neri for a while, which is on, you know where that is, 16th and Division at rush hour. And then I had to schlep to Ochoco and McLaughlin. You know where that is? Ochoco and McLaughlin in the North Milwaukee district over the Selwood Bridge during construction of the Selwood Bridge. Real schleps. And I never heard anybody come into our committee and saying, I got screwed by TriMet. The compensation is just so over the market. Plus you have all these options, like she's saying, some people just take the money and run.
So, Jim?
Thanks, Amber. I understand why most of your presentation focused on businesses as opposed to residents. Primarily because most of the corridor we're looking at goes through business areas, except in my neighborhood where it's essentially a residential neighborhood, whether it's either native or apartment. You got into concepts such as that seem to be kind of fundamental concepts of this, of just compensation, and so that no one suffers disproportionate injuries. Does that, when you're dealing with a resident, have any way to take into account what I guess I would call intangibles about someone's home? Intangibles such as the schools that their children might attend and they would wish them to continue to attend. Things like their current proximity to services, proximity even to transit.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the kinds of things.
And even things like their place in the community. The fact that they've got friends and neighbors who they may have known for 20, 30 years. Those are all intangibles that might be hard to place a dollar value on, but they could mean very much to someone being forced to leave a home that they've been in for a long time.
Those are the kinds of things that the relocation specialist will work with them to identify and try to find housing that meets all of those characteristics. Those will be the most important things that they'll look for.
Beyond simply the appraisal of a piece of property. So they can get compensation for those intangible factors?
Well, the relocation is helping find another replacement dwelling. The just compensation is for the piece of real estate for a property owner. They're separate.
So it could be taking into consideration as part of the relocation payment they might receive?
In looking for replacement dwelling, they'll focus on those things that are that family needs. In making an offer for purchase, they will take into consideration whatever that family thinks. I think the example that we're talking about here is a owner-occupied home.
Yes.
Okay. So the appraisal will come back and say, here's the offer of just compensation, and the property owner can say, but these are the other things that are important that you didn't take into consideration, and that can be part of the negotiation.
Lonnie.
A couple of questions. You had, you talked about a court case. Do you have any information on the outcome of that court case? And
No,
was-
I'm actually not sure. I asked somebody about it today because it went to appeal, and I don't know.
Okay.
I'll get back to you.
So it's public information, we would just have to look it up if we were interested.
Well, Jennifer will try to find
Yeah.
it. We were gonna
Okay.
follow up, we're
Yeah.
gonna follow up in the tenant improvements too, so
Excellent.
write that one down.
And my other question is, there are known affected properties being engaged now that, for example, we know there's a terminus in this project. Are we engaging those property owners and business owners now, knowing that no matter what happens, they're gonna be affected? And what are you doing with them?
So we've been in touch with businesses and property owners that would be affected by the options. They will also get a notice when the DEIS is released, and they are all invited to be part of the planning process. We also are, the more we can learn from property owners about how they use their site, that can help during the design phase to find ways to mitigate or minimize the impacts to those properties.
So we are engaging in people that we know that will absolutely be affected, right?
But there's not a difference. There hasn't been a difference in the way that property owners are being talked about, whether
Yeah,
they're
sure,
on an
sure, I
alignment that's an
understand
option or whether they're on a part of the alignment that's for sure. Everyone's been we've been sharing information and talking to folks pretty much the same way. Because those kind of, as Jennifer pointed out, there's a certain time in the schedule when actual negotiations can begin, and we haven't gotten there yet.
And we really do have some milestones before we know where's the project go, what kind of timeline is it on.
Thank you.
So Tim, we
Yes.
made it around the table. Tim's got the last one, but we're also 2 minutes over, so we
Okay.
have to talk about how to handle more questions.
Okay. I have a question about funding. And as I'm looking at this timeline, I'm guessing that a lot of these negotiations and a lot of this process begin after advanced design and engineering is pretty advanced. So I'm guessing, and I'm sorry if I missed this, is it after the regional funding vote? My bottom line question is TriMet paying this all sort of out of general fund? Does any of this come out of the regional
No,
funding?
during the advanced design process, that's exactly when we're working with property owners to understand how they use their property and how we tweak the design to have as little impact on them as possible.
Okay. And the funding comes from where, and can you give us an approximate number of what the total 218 relocated?
Well, I can give you that, but I don't have it off the top of my head.
You were asking what the cost was for the,
Yeah.
What's it made of?
Shelled out.
I can't remember.
But it all comes out of TriMet,
No, those are project dollars.
project dollars?
Yeah.
so half federal government, half China,
Okay.
as long as they occur after the ROD,
Mm-hmm.
record of decision. Another acronym. Did I have that in that abbreviation sheet? Okay, so we're 5 minutes over. I know that there's 1, 2, 3 questions. Do you want us, we were really rushed last time on the DES presentation. That's who's next up. But do you guys want to try to do that really fast, like in 5 minutes? Or do you want to move on? Someone?
Pass some time. Our questions?
I'd like to hear their questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's try it in 5 minutes and we'll go Bill, Michael, Debbie, because I think that's how it happened.
In response to Arnie's historical observation of what happened to the Orange Line, I just wanted to go into minutes that that is not the case here. We've had some very important testimonials from businesses and property owners that say that they're going to have intangible effects on their businesses that are unique to their situation. So that needs to be, I want to make sure the record shows that that is not even remotely the same as what happened, as what's happening now. We have a very active community back there who's actually voicing their opinions, and they want to be heard.
Thank you.
Michael?
Yes, so, thank you. Piggybacking on Lonnie's question about, you're talking to people now that might be affected. We have a situation on Devlin where a potential mitigation is to use Elmhurst instead. So are you talking to the people on Elmhurst who might be affected if that mitigation were to be implemented? Because it's not part of the DEIS.
No, we're talking to people who are on the options that are identified in the DEIS. I think as we, if that is pursued during the advanced design phase, that would be the time to talk to them. I think there will be, the DEIS will identify some ideas for potential mitigation, but that will all be fully explored during the next phase.
Yes, well, I was out there today and I was bicycling the area, and the thought occurred to me, boy, if I lived here, I would want to know that this potential mitigation is on the table. So I'm just thinking, at what point do we engage those people and let them know that maybe they should become involved in the process or the discussion?
Yeah, I think that's, I can jump in. Sure. I think that's a really good point. Discussion of mitigations at this phase in the middle of the DEIS is very odd and is not typical at all. As I think it was Chris Ford that was here last time describing, and the job of the DEIS is to reveal information and to suggest some possible ways to deal with those impacts, but not to be so specific with what the solutions to those are, that you'd actually be at a place where you'd be doing public involvement and defining those and having maps and all of that. That is unusual. Typically, in the FEIS process, the final environmental impact statement, that's when you take these ideas of possible mitigations and you refine them and you explore them and you do outreach with them, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the process that we're in. We are defining some mitigations because it's what people have been asking for from us, but it's a little bit atypical. And so it's far more likely that those would be refined and defined and worked with people to understand their particular impacts in that way, which is going to follow after the decision.
So not right away, but down the road is what you're saying. Thank you.
But as community members, they're invited to come and participate in these sessions and obtain
That is absolutely
information.
Yeah, but if I were living there, and I thought that the route were 2 blocks away, and I didn't know that there was some discussion that it could be on my street, I would want to maybe be more active than what I would otherwise.
Debbie.
Mine relates to residents being relocated. You made a comment that in some cases, they might actually have the option of upgrading in terms of needing more space based on the makeup of the family. Is there ever a instance where they end up being told they needed to move into a smaller space? No. So it's either same as or larger?
It will have to meet the standard of decent, safe, and sanitary, and whatever the size requirements are for that type of family. They wouldn't ever say you can't move into something bigger. If they need a rent supplement,
So if
they
they're
can
in
be
a
eligible for a
1,500
rent
square
supplement.
foot apartment, whatever, they couldn't be told that they need to move into like 1,200 square foot.
I don't think so. I guess I will confirm on that, but the intent is to always get people into a better situation.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks for being here. You've got a couple of follow-ups.
Yes.
Yeah, several. So Jennifer's usually at our meetings. I don't know if you've been noticing. So
Yeah, she's been noticing.
it will not be difficult for her to bring
Got the hot
updates.
seat today, so thank you for the time.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Oops, I'm editing your presentation here. Come on up. Okay. So I'd like to welcome back Heather to the group. So I said, as I started the meeting, that you would be here to go into a little bit more depth to kind of preview some of the chapters. And you can use, the projector ended up really like in your face. But so if you want to stand or anything, you can use this remote, and I'm going to get out of the way if you want to stand.
I actually kind of feel like I'm taking it up a level because Jennifer was so detailed in her presentation about the locations. But
We can't hear you.
you can't hear me. I'm sorry. I'm getting over a cold, so.
Sorry.
Which one is it? So quickly today, I want to talk just about the alternatives, just show the alternatives again, just as a quick reminder as we talk about some of the impacts in the DEIS. Then we're going to preview the impacts. We're going to go into the acquisitions, displacements, and relocations, economics, historic and archaeological, and parks and recreational resources. I know you can't see this very well, but you can just kind of see as a quick reminder where the big differences are going to be in segment A, so that top section. Segment B, you're not going to see lots of differences. So as you see the summary of the impacts, you're not going to see many differences in most of the segments and most of the alternatives in segment B. And then segment C, as you can see, there's lots of different routes, so you will see a lot more differences in the alternatives. So just quickly want to go over the impacts that we talk about in the DEIS. There's the long-term impacts, which are the ongoing impacts from construction, presence, operations, and maintenance of the light rail. Then there's the short-term impacts, which are basically construction impacts. There's indirect impacts, and those are later in time or further removed in distance. So a good example of that is transit-oriented development, which we talked about a little bit last time I was here. And then cumulative impacts, which are the incremental impact when added to past and present. So a good example I think of as a cumulative impact that has kind of been pretty significant in Portland is North Portland, and when I-5 went through, and then the continued impacts to that neighborhood. This presentation focuses mostly on long-term impacts. I will discuss a little bit about some of the construction impacts. So Chris Ford, who was here last week, made me put this slide just to make sure that the findings that I'm presenting they're pretty high level, they're really summarized. I'm not using exact numbers because they have not been approved by the Federal Transit Administration. The documents were prepared by Metro, TriMet, and FTA, and then Parametrics is helping prepare that document. And then the affected jurisdictions, they're all participating agencies, and so they're offered an opportunity to review the sections of the DEIS. So they may or may not agree with the findings in the DEIS, but it is prepared by Metro, TriMet, and FTA. So starting with acquisitions, kind of walking through what the analysis approach is, what the findings are, and then the difference between alternatives. So essentially for acquisitions, we overlay the construction footprint on parcel boundaries. And then as Jennifer went through, we are looking at 3 different types of impacts. The full acquisition is when the footprint is through the building. And this is at a pretty high level of design. So typically they're pretty conservative in what is being impacted. The partial acquisition is when it doesn't touch the building and it's just a part of the parcel. And then the temporary construction easement is essentially a buffer that's created around the footprint that's potentially needed for construction. And then for the DEIS, when we identified the different parcels that are full acquisitions, we had somebody go out and just do field verification at those parcels just to make sure that what we were seeing in the GIS data, because most of the information at this level is in geographic information systems. And so we wanted to make sure that we were pretty accurate. We didn't talk to any landowners or talk to any businesses. We just kind of drove by and said, does this seem correct in what we're seeing in the GIS data? So the findings are reported in the total number of full, partial, and TCEs for each alternative by segment in tables, and they're summarized, so you're not going to see the individual parcels. I think I mentioned that last time. Then the full table of all affected properties without the type of impact, so you'll see a list, and I'll show examples of all of these from the Federal Way EIS, so it's a little bit easier to visualize what that's going to look like.
And then the number of parcels by type, so type being the land use, multifamily, residential, single family, public, and then the residential units and businesses displaced are gonna be also in total numbers. Then there'll be a map of affected properties, but again, it's not gonna say, and this will be in the appendix, it's not gonna identify which parcels are partial, full, or TCE, they're just all affected. So an entire parcel will be identified for any parcel that's impacted. And then the mitigation is, it follows the Uniform Relocation Act, and then there are a lot of things that TriMet does that we've also put into the DEIS. So you can't see this very well, but this is an example from Federal Way of how the information is summarized in the EIS. So you've got the alternatives over here, and then the number of affected parcels. Does this have a- okay. So that's the number of parcels, and then this is by type, and then it goes into displacement. So you can see that there are differences in numbers. So a parcel that has a multifamily residential unit on it is going to have a larger number of residential displacements than a parcel that has a single family home. So you're going to see that's what the difference is in those types of numbers are from. And so this is an example of a table of all of the properties and which alternative is impacted. So again, it's just the properties and an X by it if it's impacted, and it doesn't say whether it's a full, partial, or TCE. And this is an example of the map. So this is all from the Federal Way, and it's going to look very similar in the Southwest Corridor document. So for segment A, the number of parcels are pretty similar between all of the alternatives. A2 limited access, which is a NATO alignment with limited access bridgehead improvements. Have you guys seen all of the alternatives in detail and been through them? Okay, so you kind of know what I'm talking about. They have over twice as many, that one has over twice as many residential displacements and relocations as any of the other two alternatives. So parcels versus units. So again, that's probably due to multifamily residence, which is increasing the number of relocations. And then A1 has the lowest number of business displacements, but the numbers are similar in scale in terms of they're not very far apart. So lower is relative to the total numbers. I can't share the exact numbers with you, so I'm trying to provide the relative difference, but as you know, I mean, in this scale, it could be really, really different. In segment B, the number of affected parcels, so the total number of parcels are pretty similar between the alternatives. B4 has twice as many residential displacements and relocations as any of the other alternatives. Oh, I can't see that last part. And then business displacements and relocations are similar between the alternatives. So, I mean, segment B is very commercial. There's a lot of commercial land uses on there, so there just are a lot more businesses that are impacted on that, in that segment. So in segment C, there's a pretty big difference between the ASH alignments and every other alignment in terms of residential displacements. There are about 17 times more. Again, you know, the scale, it is 17 times more, but it is because of several multifamily residential units that would be displaced in those alternatives. The Clinton alignments are the lowest overall acquisition-related impacts, so total anything, units, parcels, anything, the C Clinton alignments have the lowest number. And then in terms of parcel acquisitions, they're all pretty similar across the different alternatives.
Am I also right in saying that in the ASH alignment, those residences that are displaced tend to be, it's unregulated housing, but they're lower cost rents than other parts of the community?
I'm okay to say it, yeah. Yeah. Yes, so they are.
I'm just saying that we're displacing lower income people.
Correct.
In those communities.
So how does the cost of these acquisitions compare to the cost of construction? I know that Clinton was the most expensive to construct. So is there some similar numbers that we're talking about here? Did they balance out?
Oh boy, I haven't been too involved in the She's probably not the right person to answer that question, and I don't know if we do have someone in the room, so hold on to that question. She's gonna be talking about the DEIS impacts, and the DEIS doesn't really go into great detail about costs.
Can I jump in for 1 second?
Sure.
Those cost estimates include the cost of the acquisitions.
Oh,
It's not
good.
just
So
the
there's some.
construction.
Thanks, Matt.
And I mean, a lot of times, as they're costing it out, the acquisition cost does increase and make it different between the alternatives. I just can't speak specifically to these alternatives. So that was it for the acquisition summary. Getting into economics, this is all about businesses. So you overlay the construction footprint again with the parcels, and then you're looking at the GIS data with property tax information and number of employees. The number of employees and the property tax information is all aggregated, so you're not gonna see in any of the tables or any of the information specific parcels with estimated number of employees. That's confidential information. So it will be summarized, and it's an estimate. So, I mean, it is just trying to understand the difference between a smaller business and a larger business. So sometimes when you'll see like fewer parcels, fewer businesses impacted, but a larger number of employees displaced, there's probably a large employer that is being impacted in one of those parcels. And then we use the estimated construction cost to predict the number of job years for the project. So typically it's been pretty close in most of the projects when we use the construction cost about how many jobs could be created, and then there's also income that goes into the community because those workers buy things in the community. So there can be a lot of positive impacts from it. So the findings are reported in total number of businesses. So again, everything is really summarized. We're not talking about individual businesses. The estimated number of employees, aggregated per alternative. Then the tax revenue as a loss, loss as a percent of the total for a municipality. So we're looking at, Tigard and the city of Portland, what is their total tax revenue, and what percent is that income tax to, what percentage is that a loss to that municipality? And like Jennifer said, a lot of these businesses, many of the businesses will choose to relocate within that municipality. So it's kind of an overestimation of the potential loss, because if they relocate in, that tax revenue is not necessarily lost because they're just moving to a different location.
So to clarify, what you just said was that it estimates the loss of the taxes to that municipality, assuming every business that's relocated goes somewhere else.
Goes away, yeah. That's how it's reported generally. But there's a caveat in there that says many choose to relocate within the municipality. So yeah. So again, segment A, the number of affected parcels are similar. A1, Barber has the fewest business displacements, and 1/3 the number of displaced employees for those businesses between all of the segment A alternatives. In segment B, they're all pretty similar. You can see just in the alignments, they're all pretty similar. And so the number of employees, the number of parcels, and the income tax, or the property tax loss is all pretty similar between all of the different alternatives in segment B. And in segment C, the I-5 branch has the highest total number of businesses displaced. But C3, which is Clinton I-5, has the highest number of employees displaced. So there's that example of, you can see the parcel versus the number of employees, and probably a larger employer. So C3 has 2.5 times more employees displaced than C2, which is the lowest number of employees.
In each of these comparisons, when the information you're providing is say that this has 1/3 as many as this one, or this has 3 times as many as this one, those mathematical relationships don't mean much unless you know what the numbers are.
I know.
3 times as many if it's 2 to 6 versus 20 to 60, or.
I know, and we're not in a place right now because of where we are in the review cycle to be able to share what the numbers are. And my husband's an engineer, and I was like, what's the best way to present this information when I can't
actually say what the numbers are, and he told me he prefers this over percentages, so, but I get, because anything, the denominator could be anything, but yeah, I see what you're saying. The good news is the DEIS will have this information. It will have the information. I think this gives you the sneak peek into the relative difference. I mean, 17 times is still, it could be 17 to 1. It's still a pretty big difference when you're looking at the difference between alternatives.
Yeah, the 3 to 1, if you're talking like small numbers.
Yeah,
I understand. Very significant.
I see what you're saying. It will be in the DEIS. So construction impacts, as Jennifer mentioned in her presentation, this is a pretty important one in economics. There's the positive construction impacts with jobs and expenditures within the local economy, and then there's the negative construction impacts. So businesses adjacent to construction, there's the rerouting of traffic, there's access issues, there's noise and dust, there's just plain, someone drives by, they want to go to the business and they decide not to because it's just too much work. And so there are those impacts. TriMet has a lot of programs to help businesses during construction, and Jennifer talked about a few of those, but they do work really hard with the local businesses to try to mitigate those impacts due to construction. We can pause for a couple of questions there if you want. You guys tired or what? Did it get too warm in here? Okay, we got some. All right, so we definitely have time for these 3 questions, and we'll see if we have time for more after. So let's start with Chad.
So I wrote this down, so bear with me. It says, is there any multi-year data which details the sales or profitability per business displaced before and after development? That make sense?
That would be a Jennifer question.
Much relationship after a while.
So, for each business that's displaced, do we have any chart graphs, Excel spreadsheets, whatever, showing what their sales profitability was prior to and after?
We don't have that information.
That's too bad.
Elise.
One of the things that I was popping out at me when we're talking about the C options and Tigard especially, we have a lot of regional businesses that are going to be affected as it comes through the Tigard Triangle, and there's nothing mentioning regional impacts. Some of the manufacturing businesses, the Portland Orthopedic Clinic, a couple of the other businesses in the area are regional. They're regional employers, regional draws, and they have regional outfeed. That's something that I'm very concerned about in the Tigard area, the regional impact.
Yeah, so let's talk about those impacts that you listed. So you listed jobs. So they're regional in that people travel to Tigard from other places for the job.
Or like 5 different communities traveling into Tigard for some of the jobs.
And then what were the others that you mentioned? That customers come from?
Well, we have outfeed, like Portland Orthopedic feeds out into the region to all the physicians in the area, and people are coming into that location because of the highway. And then they're feeding back out to their communities. So to have a business like Portland Orthopedic displaced because of the route, again, that's going to have a huge impact on all the other locations.
Okay. I mean, can you talk about whether, so those aren't economic impacts the way the DEIS studies economic impacts, because this chapter is looking so much at taxes, and where does that kind of information exist in the DEIS?
No, it doesn't, because we're not identifying specific businesses, so there's, so that specificity can typically be more in the final environmental impact statement as we start doing more analysis on one alternative. But when you're looking at various alternatives and you have so many parcels that are impacted, it's really difficult to do the same level of analysis on every single parcel to have that equitable treatment in the EIS. So we use
data that we can access easily right now. And as we move further, I don't know if did you go into that level of detail in the FEIS when you did the? I'm not sure. Okay.
Because it would be nice to, as we see the route in the future, knowing the businesses that are in the area, maybe our chambers in the cities that are the jurisdiction could come back to us with the regional effect on those businesses.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
how,
I think.
and the regional impact.
Yeah, as I was thinking about it, it's perhaps the individuals at this table that then have the capacity to talk about that information and bring that information. So that's something to think about, how this group, if that's important to everybody, how do you guys talk about that and bring it to the table? And it's good to know that you won't be seeing that kind of information in the DEIS, so that you can prepare for how you want to have that conversation together. Because that's the kind of community information that you guys as different representatives of your groups can bring into the conversation.
I think it'll be the business itself, don't you think that will be able to help us understand?
Yeah, and
what
between the number of
percentage of your-
businesses you've been hearing from. and your
Well,
audience.
right, I feel like the DEIS doesn't have the specificity, but somebody would need to give us the specificity of, here is a list of all the businesses that are potentially impacted, so that we can have that initial dialogue as well as track it through the process. My thinking is, there hasn't been that data collected, but we should be collecting that data, and maybe at least within Tigard and Fullerton, we can be connecting with those businesses and tracking what happens to the community process and afterwards, at a high level, depending on how many businesses are impacted. But I feel like that information needs to be tracked.
Absolutely.
I mean, when you were talking about acquisitions, you said the list that will come out of the DEIS are a list of addresses, correct? Right?
Yeah, but they won't say which ones are partial or full. But you will see all the impacted.
So that's what we'll have to work with.
But at some
And you'll know
point,
which alternative impacts.
when the rubber hits the road and the rail starts getting laid down, TriMet's gonna know who they're talking to.
Right, but you've got, this group has to make a decision about the LPA before.
Right, no, I understand that, I'm just thinking
Starts
maybe
speaking.
post LPA, that's an activity for.
But it seems like I would want that data before we had the rubber hit the road and chose that decision or
We can
that
look
final
at,
round.
we can sit down and look at some maps with you and kind of talk about the businesses that you know, since you guys know your community so well. That's something we can get together and do, the chambers and staff. Okay, let's hold on to that idea and figure out how to move forward with it. Roger, you're our last one.
Okay, coming last, but probably overlap with some things said here. So in the DEIS, I heard that there was going to be a list of property addresses or something like that, or parcel numbers, but I want to see a map. The alternative, by each alternative alignment, it's like this, and I want to see what Jim said about, how many businesses, how many employees, and some other relevant information to inform our recommendations. That's what I'm looking for. And more on an alignment basis choice map that really shows the big picture there. Is that something that we might reasonably expect? No?
It's not gonna be in the DEIS, so I can find out if that's possible. I'm not sure that it is.
Aaron,
But I can find
is
out.
that photo right there, the resolution that we're gonna be seeing?
Yeah, so this is
Yeah.
the affected.
Is it tax law?
I'm kind of looking at Michaela because she's preparing these maps.
Probably not this level of detail, just because of the sheer number of maps that would require. Maybe zoom out a little bit from this, but you should be able to see the individual parcels.
And the
Yep.
property owner will be able to say, hey, this is my tax lot number.
Yeah, and they'll be matched up.
They'll be
matched up with the list. So they'll be matched up with this list. So you got this and then that with the number in it. And again, it just doesn't say whether it's a TCE, a partial, or a full, but you will be able to do the correlation.
And Heather, I feel like you may have answered part of Roger's question, because the reason that there's not this kind of map with like a list of, this is the business name and the number of employees and all that, some of that information is considered confidential for a
Yeah.
government agency to be publishing.
I
So there's
wanna
gonna be
zoom
some
out.
limitations.
I want to zoom out further. I don't need to know the exact address, the number of employees per business and all that stuff. But by the alignment choice that we're considering, I'd sure like to see an aggregate of
Oh,
what we're
okay.
talking about, the types of.
You
That will
absolutely
be,
will see that.
that will be in the DIS.
Yeah, what Jim said, that I felt the same lack of substance in this alignment has more affected businesses versus that's meaningless.
And it's only because of where we're at in the process that
I
I'm not
understand.
sharing numbers. But in the DEIS, you absolutely will have a total. A1 has this many parcels, this many of multifamily, this many single family, this many. That will be summarized by alternative, so you can go across and see what the differences are.
And I'm
Between-
only asking
okay,
that that
good.
get thrown onto a map.
They're not gonna, those products are not gonna be the same. So you'll see, this is the summary that you'll see. So number of affected parcels, and then by type, and then displacements. Summarized by alternative.
And an economic impact for each of those affected segments, or
Well, the
choices?
economics is a different chapter, and it's summarized the same way, by
But
alternative.
it wouldn't be put with, like, if you take this segment, you're gonna displace this many people, this many businesses, and it's gonna have this economic impact on, you know, like, this is much more, cost efficient. I mean, you have to have some numbers to know what that impact is.
It's not characterized in that way. It's characterized in terms of loss of, taxes, property taxes, and loss of number of employees, and loss of number of businesses. But it's not, we're not analyzing each business individually and summarizing that.
No, but you're gonna give a cum total for that
Yes.
segment.
Yes.
Yes.
It's not dollarized except for the property tax.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
It's only property tax, not income, revenue out of the business.
Correct, correct.
And the number of income tax. I mean, income tax is what drives our state. How many jobs you have and the income that they're making is what drives our state. It's how we're set up. I mean, we could wish that it was set up differently, but that is how we fund our state is income tax. So I would wanna know what's the income loss or maybe opportunity out of an area.
Yeah, that's not gonna be in the DEIS.
That would be logical.
Some of it would be, yeah, a lot of that information is
That-
confidential and very difficult to.
Is that something that's controlled in you or anything?
I don't think we have that kind of data.
I think we've talked about this before too, we're at a point where we have lots of different options that will not be chosen. So if you're a business, or if you own a property and you're leasing that to a business, you certainly don't want that identified publicly as a place that might be acquired, when realistically, there's a good chance that it will never be acquired, but that reduces the value of your property. It could, or it could impact if people want to lease it, or, so that's why we need to summarize things. You can't identify specific properties until at FEIS where you know that that's going to happen.
So you have the preferred alternative.
So I recognize this can be frustrating. I want us to keep going. Part of the reason that we're doing this is so that you understand what you're gonna see before you see it. And I recognize the frustration at the table of seeing still comparisons, and this one's a little more than this one, but you're not seeing the numbers yet. But at least you recognize the kind of data and information you'll get, so that when you do have those numbers, it'll be a little bit easier to hopefully understand, and you'll get some of the questions about what you are getting and what you're not now. I'm hopeful that that's helpful to you as we get into it, but I recognize that you're still not getting all the numbers that you want, Jim and others. But let's keep going, so we have time to get to all the topics.
So with historic and archaeological, it's a pretty robust process. You take all the parcels that are affected, and currently where we are right now, anything that's 50 years and older, we evaluate for potential eligibility on the National Register of Historic Places. So we use 1970 as a cutoff. We'll go to 75 in the final environmental impact statement, but when you're in 1970 and you're in South Portland, there are a lot of properties to evaluate. I think it was somewhere along the lines of 515 total properties that were evaluated for eligibility on the historic register. So then they do a field review for every single property. They drive by, they look at it, and it's a professional that meets the Department of Interior standards for doing this type of evaluation. They look at the property, at the building, they look at integrity, they look at, for South Portland, is it a contributing resource to that historic district? So there are a lot of different things that they look at. I just want to say that for the historic district, there is absolutely an impact when individual resources are being impacted within that district. And then there is the research and pedestrian survey for archaeological resources. So they just look at historic potential locations for archaeological sites. And then they do a pedestrian survey to just they walk along the entire corridor to just see if there's any sort of land formations that stand out to them as archaeologists. And again, all of these professionals meet the Department of Interior standards, so nobody can just go out and do it if they want to. So we focused for this analysis on full acquisitions and really focusing on identifying those properties that are historic, that are full acquisitions. There are a lot of different layers of regulations that go into historic properties. So there's NEPA, kind of looking at it from that NEPA perspective and the choices that you have to make. But then there's also Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, and then there's Section 4F of the U.S. Department of Transportation Act. So there are two other ways that there are layers on layers of protection for the historic resources. Then we looked at them, full, partial, TCE. So again, they're summarized, but there's a lot more detail on the full because there are so many regulations that you have to follow that we have to go into more detail about them, and we have to understand what kind, if they really are eligible or not for the historic register. And then for the mitigation is typically a little bit, it's pretty creative, talking about interpretation of the resources and documentation. And then it's very collaborative. We work with the State Historic Preservation Office, TriMet Metro, local jurisdictions, City of Portland, there's landmark commissions, there's lots of different things that we have to go through, and a lot of people who participate in what we do in terms of mitigation for historic resources. So segment A has the most historic resources, and it has the most impacts to historic resources. A1 Barber has the fewest historic impacts, but all of them impact historic resources. They all impact historic parks. So in this segment, you've got Terwilliger, Dunaway, Laird Hill, and George Hines Natural Area that are all historic parks. So it's just like, there's a lot of historic resources in this area. Even the viaducts on Barber are historic, and in our current designs, those are replaced. So that's another level of analysis we have to do for those viaducts. Segment B has a lot fewer resources, and they're really, B1 and B2 have higher impacts than the others, but there's really relatively little difference between the alternatives in segment B, and the same is true for segment C, because there are just really few resources in segment C in Tiger that we're impacting. And so Fulton Park is another historic park in the project. Oh, you didn't talk about C. I didn't? Oh, yeah, very minor. Okay, very minor, yeah. There's like, I think 4 resources or something in segment C.
We can take a couple questions. So Roger.
For the purpose of this discussion, the word impact, are we defining that as only those properties which could be subject to full, partial, or TCE?
Yes, right now. So we specify in the document, because that's a really great question, because there can be indirect impacts to historic resources when you introduce something that wasn't historically there in the context of that property. So that is something that we'll look at, but we need a little bit more information about the details of the property. And since we're at this, the number of properties and the number of alternatives we're at right now, we've kind of just brushed over that, and we will do that analysis in the final environmental impact statement. So we'll be looking at the visual, the noise, all of those impacts to historic resources in the final.
Arnie.
there's a historic synagogue, Ahavat Achim, which means brotherly love. And it was built in the 60s by John Storrs, who was a famous architect. Jennifer and I went to an interesting workshop on Friday with architecture students at the University of Oregon Portland campus, where they are examining what's going to go on with that hill between the Gibbs Station and OHSU, and the synagogue is in the middle of that. So there's all kinds of considerations about what to do with that building, and working with the congregation in a congregation that's already moved out of the neighborhood, and all the adaptive reuses that could be used for that building. It's very fascinating what those students are coming up with. So that's an example of historic preservation versus just total demolition.
Jennifer, I know that some students are coming to the steering committee on Monday. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Do you have any idea if the students working on that project are one of the ones scheduled to come to the steering committee? No. All right. There will be some updates about that general. You've been getting updates about the city, sustainable city year. That's what Arnie's referring to as one of the classes that's been working. There will be an update of the steering committee if you're interested in hearing more about that. All right, you guys ready to move on to the last one? Okay. So there are a lot of parks in this corridor, actually, in South Portland. And so we went through and, because it's a linear transportation project, it's that partial acquisition of lots of different parks, which a lot of them I've already talked about because they're also historic. So we identify any park, trail, recreation facility in the project area and analyze what the impact might be to any of those. We're really asking the question, are the functions of the park being impacted? So what is it vegetation removal? And not to say that vegetation removal is not important, but we look at that, and is it impacting any of the activities that are occurring at the park? So are we removing a baseball diamond or a tennis court or something like that? But the vegetation removal is also really important, that we're looking at that, and a lot of times the vegetation itself can provide shielding and contribute to the setting of that park and why people visit that park. So those are also very important. This is going to be what you'll see is the area of impact for parks, and again, it's using the construction footprint plus the buffer for the potential, the extra area needed temporarily for construction. And so all of them are partial acquisitions. We have not identified any park that we would fully acquire. And then there's a lot of coordination with the park owner and or manager. So we've been coordinating a lot with the city of Portland on the potential impacts of these parks, because it's really important to make sure that we're in agreement on how those impacts are described for the parks.
Just in Portland?
Well, Tiger too, but we're not really impacting any parks in Tiger. So here's a map of the parks. You can see just the linear Terwilliger Parkway is just adjacent to the entire project. And so the widening of Barber that needs to occur to accommodate the light rail is going to impact little sections of that. And then of course the Markham Hill connector is, all of the options would impact, at least temporarily for sure, with vegetation removal, a big swath of Terwilliger Parkway. And then just sections of George Hines, Fulton, and then some of these other parks are adjacent but not being impacted. So the Stevens Creek and Custer are not impacted parks. Those bubbles that are out there, those are the station access improvements, and so those are improvements like bicycle lanes, sidewalks, things like that. If we're impacting a park, it's a lot easier to minimize and design around those potential impacts. So we haven't identified those to the same level as widening Barber. And we haven't designed the station access improvements to the same level either, because it depends on what alternative is selected. That's the station access improvements that would go along with the alternative, just depends on the alternative that's selected. So a lot of these will go away. And then this is segment C.
there is the wetlands, Canez wetlands that would be impacted, and with some of the alternatives. And then Tatso Dog Park is in there. It's not actually physically impacted, but there would be with a couple of the alternatives, change in access to the park. And so there really, I mean, honestly, there's really not a big difference between alternatives, because when you're looking at the section of segment A that impacts the parks, it's all in the section that's pretty similar between the alternatives. It's not, there's not a big difference between the different alternatives. And there is vegetation removal, and there will be an area of impact, but there won't be a tree count. That's something that we would look at as we move into the final environmental impact statement, and then we definitely have to do it through permitting as we move forward with the alternative that's selected and built. And then segment C has no physical changes, and segment B has pretty low impact on any parks as well. So there's just there's the Markham School, and Fulton is in segment B, right? Yeah, segment B. And there's just a corner that that would be impacted. And again, you'll see in the document that there's a huge effort to try to minimize and avoid those impacts. So anywhere you can, they're going to try to narrow the impacts to any of those parks.
So they'll describe the impacts in the
Yeah, the document describes the park, the activities that occur at the park, and then what impact is occurring to those activities at the park itself. It's pretty detailed because of there's another law, which is Section 4F of the U.S. Department of Transportation Act, that requires an in-depth analysis of historic and parks and recreation facilities. So you have to see quite a bit more detail on those.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah. All right, stay. Don't leave yet because we have some questions. Elise, do you want to go first?
The parks are the intangible effects on the local community. One of those things that enhances their community, their properties, et cetera. Are you getting community feedback on the park impact and taking into regard how it's going to change, how that park is used and how the community is able to use the park?
We're not taking community feedback on the park impacts right now, but that's definitely something that would be helpful during the comment period on the DEIS. So we describe in general what the impacts are and where it's located, but specific feelings toward the park and how that affects their livability is not necessarily described, but those are really good comments to get from people. Absolutely.
So that's actually a really perfect example of what the purpose of the public and agency comment period for the DEIS is on those elements that the analysis as strangers and professionals coming in can only go so far. And so when people's comments about the DEIS are, I read the parks chapter and I read what you said about the park that's near my house and you didn't consider this way that the park is used. That's the kind of comment that's really effective in making a change in how the analysis is discussed in the final environmental impact statement. So that's a perfect example of the type of comment that we're looking for in the DEIS about parks or whatever other topic. Bill.
Yes, you mentioned briefly impact on wetlands on section C. Is there a differentiation between one or the other as to the level of effect on that wetlands?
Yes, I cannot remember off the top of my head which alternatives.
All of the ash.
Oh, the ash alternatives.
C1, C2, and C5
go through.
So C1, C2, and C5?
But we will talk about that topic, and I'm pretty sure it's in March. Yeah, I think it's next on the list. So our intent is to do this similar presentation, and we'll continue with, I don't remember if it was 4 or 5 additional topics. And is it called wetlands? Or what is it called?
Ecosystems.
Ecosystems is the chapter, the discipline that talks about that wetland.
Because you just mentioned it generally in section C. I didn't know if you were differentiating yet or not.
Yeah, I mentioned it in Parks and Recreation because it's not open to the public, so it's not really a park
I'm fishing for decision points.
Yes, there will be a differentiation between the alternatives that impact the Kenez wetland and the ones that do not. Sarah?
The analysis approach included identifying trails, but none were mentioned. I don't know if that was from a lack of impact or just a lack of mention, but I'm wondering if there was any attempt to find the so-called GO trails or trails of use, unofficial, undesignated trails that might be in an area. I know there's one in my neighborhood, the rail line's nowhere near it, but for example, if it was suddenly cut off, a whole lot of people suddenly don't have a way to get from one point of the neighborhood to another. So, anything, is there any way to, like along the, it would have to be done by pedestrian.
Yeah.
Is anything like that done, or is it just from
No.
official trails?
They're official trails, yeah. So again, would that be a helpful, is that the helpful kind of comment? Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't know where to look for that
Right,
kind of
yeah,
thing,
yeah.
so that is a great comment to get, like, hey, there's this trail here that you didn't know about, and City of Portland might come after you. Might go shut it down.
Well, we want it to be considered.
Thanks for telling us.
Yeah.
Michael, or is that yours or Tim? Who's
No.
that? Tim.
Question, you may not be able to answer this, but this is kind of talking about impacts that you don't assume in a negative way on parks and recreation. Do you see positive impacts sometimes with these alignments, or would this have it if you're got an alignment that's abutting a park land and you're acquiring property or somehow that can't be utilized otherwise? Do you see those potentially adding to park or recreation areas?
Yeah, you can. I think also a positive impact you're gonna see is just the increased access and ability for people to get to the different parts. But if there was a positive, anytime there is a positive impact in an EIS, we definitely document that. Yeah.
Can I give an example?
Yeah.
On the Orange Line, there was an impact to a wetland, and I can't remember what the impact to a historic resource was. But there was an impact to both a wetland and a historic resource near the Bybee station on the Orange Line. So mitigation included adding some interpretive signage in the light rail station on the screen where you can see what time your train is coming. There's a scrolling thing that tells about the history of that, of the area. And then, so that was a mitigation for the historic stuff, but for the wetlands impact, some of the mitigation was paying into a larger project that was happening to replace some habitat in the adjacent Westmoreland Park. So Westmoreland Park underwent this huge restoration project and added a nature playground and boardwalks and stuff to look at the natural area. So it was a huge enhancement to that park. And those were both of those things were about mitigating impacts that were found in the environmental process.
This is the very first time in any CAC meeting I remember us ending a topic before the scheduled time. So I'm kind of in shock right now. I don't really know what's going on. Okay, thank you, Rachel.
So I think for me, it's, besides, I think I hit a wall about 45 minutes ago, but besides that, it's a little daunting because it feels like there's a level of precise information we're not gonna get, and even though we're making a recommendation, and so trying to figure out how to do that is really hard.
Does it help to know now what information you'll get and what you won't, so that you can be ready to have a
Yeah, I
conversation?
mean, it does, thank you, but it's still not everything.
It doesn't make you really happy.
Right, well, most, yes, I mean, I'm happy. I'm also really tired, and also I'm having a hard time like getting my mind around the weight of the decision with the lack of detail.
Well, I think, and I don't know this for sure, but what you might be reacting is something I felt in myself too, which is that as you start to see some of this information from the DES, you're not seeing a whole lot of things that differentiate between your choices, right? You're seeing this one has a lot of impacts and this one has a lot of impacts, or they're really similar, or
this one has 17 times, well, is that a lot or not? If it's, 17 times a one.
Well, you
17 times is actually a lot.
You will have that for your decision.
Yeah, but in general, you're seeing a lot of similarities. So yes, there's two things. Rachel specifically mentioned the information that you don't have yet, and that you're seeing alluded to. You're like seeing images, like the direction of it, but you're not seeing the actual information, so that's frustrating because you haven't gotten it yet, and you've been waiting for a very long time, so that's frustrating in itself. But I also just want to point out that I'm also noticing that you just might not be seeing the kind of differences that would make your choice easier.
But if you know the ratios, it's 17:1. I would assume you have the denominator and the numerator.
We do.
to make that calculation.
We do, and FTA needs to review it and approve it before it can be published.
But our participation and our recommendation is one part of an environmental impact statement that informs a final decision. So it's not like we wield all this power here to crush people's lives, right? Am I understating that? Our role?
I think, I'm not sure I totally understand what you, Jim,
It's the steering committee that makes the choice.
yeah.
We're one vote on the draft EIS that goes to the steering committee.
Well, actually, I would state it a little bit differently. You guys are gonna receive the DEI, everybody's gonna receive, the DEIS is gonna be published. And you're gonna get public and agency feedback on it. So hopefully a lot of these kind of, you missed this goat trail and I use this park in this way and you didn't talk about that, and a bunch of other information is gonna come into. And we're gonna process it as quickly as we can to feedback some of that to you, particularly what affects the decisions. But that piece of, that DEIS is one source of information. You guys get to look at that DEIS and that information and whatever things you know from your life experience in those groups that you represent to say, okay, we're gonna help the steering committee by making a recommendation of what we think this alignment should be. And that's your job. But you don't have to rely on just the information in the DEIS, although there might not be a whole lot more that staff can bring to the table for you. But you have your experience and knowledge and information and gut feelings, and that's what you're gonna talk about once we get into deliberations to reach that recommendation.
At what point though, during the conversation, do we find out like the numbers of what is 17 to 1?
When the DEIS comes out,
So-
April or May, probably May, let's just say May. May.
Let's just say that.
You don't, we're probably gonna be cut off in June or July by when the steering committee needs to make their decision. So we could keep talking, but the steering committee will make a decision with or without us. So yeah, it's gonna be, there's this, that's very tight between May and July.
Less information.
We need more tabs.
Oh, okay.
And can we commit to first Monday of each month? I think we spoke at this last meeting, but can we mark our calendar? Are there any
Yes.
exceptions to the?
Did you get an updated one of these? Because we put one out in a previous meeting.
May have.
I'll make sure you get one. All right, so everyone, before you leave, our next meeting is March 5th. It's the first Monday in March, same time, same place. Our intent is to do a similar presentation like this with Heather. We're gonna have Heather back, she's gonna talk about other topics. Thank you, Rachel, for talking about, like, thank you, everyone. You guys, could you please be quiet for just a second? You guys, I'm not done yet. Everyone, please be respectful, we're not quite done with the meeting. If you wanna talk, you can go out in the hallway. So I'd like more feedback after tonight about whether that, I mean, about the presentation itself, and if there's something we can do with the presentation, or if there's other information or data that you want talked about. But our plan is to kind of have Heather back and go through additional topics in the EIS, including ecosystems and some other, and transportation. We'll bring in staff, that's gonna be a big one. We'll bring in staff to talk about those traffic impacts. Okay, so I'll see you on March 5th. Good night, everybody. Thank you all in the audience.